Welcome to ISA class with Jess Hinds, Turning Shit into Fertilizer, which I just love the name of this class. It gives us a little bit of insight into Jess's personality. We are thrilled to have you all join us for this class. We've had Jess on several classes in the past and events, and she is brilliant and phenomenal. She's helped many dozens and many writers get nominated for awards, Tonys, Emmys, Oscars, people who are in writing rooms all over. And I could go on, but I don't think anything I could say will actually do justice to what you're about to experience. The classes that I've sat in on with Jess, they're mind-blowing. They're so insightful and educational, and it's really an incredible experience. So I'm so glad to be able to bring this. We're glad to bring this to you. And Jess, thank you so much for doing this for us.
Woo! Oh,
yes.
Thank you guys. No, it is an important part for me to always be able to reach a larger audience without, I think it's important to offer free access and education. And, I love doing this stuff because it's so different to have a big group that I can't visually see compared to what most of the time I've got like 5 people, and most of my classes and my workshops, I'm either doing one-on-one work or it's like that really small group. And so it is super fun to sort of get up and do this like en masse, thing that feels like this is like the Zoom version of being in a stadium. Yeah. And so I think that's super fun. And it's just amazing to see how many different people are here from so many different places. But yes, you guys, I am Jess Hinds. If you know me, then welcome, and thank you so much for coming back. Apparently my terrible jokes have not scared you away. If you have never interacted with me, hold on, I've got a lot of energy. And just know that the most important thing for me is I want to meet writers where they're at. I want to understand where they want to go. And I want to use my decades of research and experience to help you move forward to that place where you want to go. I'm a really big fan of, I don't sit at the finish line and scream for you to get to me. I like getting dirty and messy and meeting you where you're at and understanding what you actually want so that I can then give you the tools to move forward to go where you want to go. It's also very important to me that I believe artists are weird, unique, individual beings. And I will rail forever against the way that art education is commonly done, especially in like my master's program that I did, where, you have this system and you're pushing people through a system which works really well for some things, but can rob a lot of people of their artistry. So I always want to understand the uniqueness of the brain of the writer I'm working with and the uniqueness of their vision for the project so that I can help you get there in the most effective way possible for you. A lot of my research is coming from psychology, neurolinguistics, neuroscience, behavioral economics, evolutionary biology. So there's a lot of sciencey stuff that I like to get into because I think one of the things missing from a lot of the way that we look at how to tell a story and write a screenplay, there's a lot missing that comes from how does a human being actually create? Where does creativity come from in the mind and the body? How does a reader read a script? Neurologically, what's going on for their eyes and their mind, and how does that all encode in memory? And so to me, there's just a lot going on in the human body when it comes to creating or when it comes to watching or reading those creations. And so I got super obsessed with figuring out like what is the neuroscience of visual storytelling. And so oftentimes a lot of that annoying research, I find ways to turn into actionable tools for you guys so that you can suffer less and write more. It's not going to be completely painless. All great things require a little bit of pain, and writing a script and bringing it to a place where it's awesome and able to be sent out into the universe is going to be difficult and it's going to be painful, but you do not have to suffer. And so that's sort of my approach to everything. And also the use of meditation, obviously from meditative writing. But right now we're getting really, really crafty. So if you sat in on one of my more meditative classes and you get to see sort of soul mother Jess, now you might start to see some of like father craft that I have going on, which I find really, really fun because I get to nerd out. So I hope that you guys are a little bit into the nerdiness stuff too. So like I said, I need to know where you guys are right now. And so what I would love to know, oh, not literally, I love that. Someone's just like, I'm in California, Jess, I already told you. Not physically, not literally like where you're at in the world, but in your writing, right? I would love for you all to tell me, like, when it comes to rewriting, what do you struggle with the most? Or what is the biggest pain in the butt? Or where is the place where you fall flat on your face, or you give up and you end up walking away for like 3 weeks or 3 months, or gosh, 3 years from a project? So if you guys want to write in now, like, I will build the rest of this class. I've got about 12 different places we could go that I've done all my work, but I want to make sure that I help as many people as possible. So characters, great. We were definitely talking about characters. Self-editing, Ooh, oh, so much. Yes. I mean, I love this. This is very exciting, but I can't read this quickly, you guys. I'm dyslexic. Okay, fabulous. Getting off track, self-editing. Great fixing, so many options. Great character arc and development structure. Yes, cutting the fat. Wonderful dialogue, killing my darlings. Oh, what an interesting phrase. What to look for in your first draft so you can come up with a game plan as to attack the second draft. Great. I would like to start there. I think that's one of the most valuable things when it comes to rewriting, is how to actually look at your script. Before we even talk about rewriting, most writers, I find, they're kind of getting lost in the fact that they're not choosing to reread the work that they've already done in the most effective way. So let's start with, let's say you get a first draft done. All right, first draft is done. What's the first thing you do? Most writers will sit down and they will reread their script, and they start circling or changing everything they see that's wrong, right? So this is not going to be helpful. Your conscious brain can only focus on a couple of things at a time. It cannot be looking at your structure and your dialogue and it can't be monitoring all those things. So when most people sit down, if you are not choosing brain, this is what I want you to focus on when you reread this script, you're leaving it up to whatever sort of pops up. And it's sort of like a Russian roulette situation, but most of the time what ends up happening is you sit down and you're like, let me find everything that's wrong with this script. And that is just a really abusive and horrific thing to do to yourself. It's going to make it very, very difficult to feel like it's possible to do the rewrite and actually get that script where it needs to go. So instead of sitting down and saying, let me point out everything that I think isn't working and is, shitty about this, the first time you read through your script, I want you to do the following things. A, I want you to print it out, okay? So on paper. Then I want you to get away from electronics, all right, so that you can just sit somewhere comfortable and, set a timer if you have to be somewhere within the next 3 hours. I don't know how, I'm a slow reader, so set a timer. And I want you and then set an intention, be like, I'm just going to read this, and I'm just going to read it as if I was someone who hadn't written this. I'm going to read it as if I was reading the script that my niece had given me. I'm going to read this just looking for things I didn't know existed in this script. And so you read it to just understand the story, to experience the story, to see what it's like to be a reader of the work rather than the writer of the work. And so for that first read through, you can have a little journal next to you. And the only thing I would want you to write down are, what are the things that you experienced in this read that you didn't realize existed in this script? Our artistry tends to sneak out, and our unconscious tends to sneak things into our pages and our scenes that we have no idea that we're doing. And that's where some of the most awesome story elements come from. So the first time you read through your work, look for what's working, look for what is magical, look for what is here that I wrote that I don't even realize that kind of like magically happened. And you want that to be the place where you start, because you want to be able to protect all of the awesome goodness and secure that before you move on to anything that needs to be cut out or needs to be reworked. The other thing I also say about why you want to print it out is because like you just want to ignore any spelling or grammar stuff. Just ignore it. I know that's really hard for most people, and if it is, then go through and just fix the spelling grammar really quickly. But the more comfortable you can be with it being messy in early drafts, the quicker you will get to a final draft and the more creative you will be. So if that's quite difficult for you, I suggest practicing. You can practice and train your body to be more and more comfortable with your script looking messy in an early draft. The messiness is actually quite helpful. If you make it too clean and tight in the first draft, it's actually much harder to rewrite the script. And I find a lot of people get attached to the cleanliness of their script and they don't want to rough it up. And then we sit there and I'm like, you have to like the scene isn't working. We've got to rework it, but it looks so pretty and nice that they don't want to mess it up. And so for that reason, I always encourage writers to keep it messy at the beginning, because then your urgency to clean it up will aid in the rewriting process rather than neurologically get in the way of you cleaning it up. I have a lot of people where it's like they read a script and it looks like a screenplay because it's pretty and nice on the page, but it's not actually doing what it needs to do. There's no scene structure, there's no act structure, the character development's off, the relationships don't go anywhere, thematically it's all over the place, but it looks like scene heading, action, dialogue. And so it's like a very beautifully decorated cake that when you bite into it tastes like sand. Not helpful. So practice being okay writing messy and letting it be messy until you get to the final draft. In the final draft, yeah, you want to clean and polish that baby up. But if you get obsessed with cleaning your script up in the first couple of drafts, it's kind of like, it's like mopping your floor first and then dusting. You're just going to end up remopping that same floor 5 or 6 different times because you're not doing a top-down approach to cleaning your house. Sound good to everyone? All right. I know for some of you, you're going to be like, Also, if you're one of those people where it's like when you're typing, you feel the need to fix things as they go, just take a towel and put it over your computer screen so that you can't see the spelling errors, and only take it off the screen at the end of your session. And then you can go through and clean up. And that'll keep you from switch tasking back and forth between editing and writing. And wasting a lot of energy switching back and forth. Great. Okay, so that's the first time you read your script. That was just the first time, you guys. You're going to read it again. Okay, so the next time you read your script, take 24 hours off, right? Come back to the script. And now when you write your script, what I want you to do is go through, and this is when you create your first working summary. This is not a summary that you send out into the world or that you give to any other human being. This is a summary for you for the rewrite. So you first start, you just read a couple of scenes, summarize them in a sentence. Read a couple of scenes, summarize them in a sentence. Read a couple of scenes, summarize them in a sentence. So then you go through, because you probably aren't going to be able to reread your entire script every single day or even every week. You should definitely reread it every month. But you can reread that summary you have and go, look, this is a 1 to 2 page what I have. This is the story. This is the plot of everything that's going on in my screenplay. And it's only 1 to 2 pages, so I can reread that every single day. Great. Now you have that. Then you want to go through and looking at that summary. The summary is a great place to check for bigger things, right? So the overall structure, number one, the overall story arc, number two, the overall plot, number three, story and plot, different things. It really helps to separate those two. I know a lot of people use them interchangeably. It doesn't help you write. The theme and character arc. Those are the things that are going to be easier to check in this document than when you're plowing through and trying to read the entire script at once, right? Number one was so structure, story, plot, theme, and character change. These are sort of the bigger things we can look at from a pulled out point of view and be like, okay, what's working and what's not. Now, here's the thing. In your first draft, 99% of the time, some of these are going to be working a little bit, and almost all of them, there's going to be room for improvement. There is no person I know who in their first draft nails 100% even one of these things. So stop trying to do it. It's impossible. You don't need to, but all the first draft needs to be is done, you guys. Like, that's it. It doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be done, so that then you have something to work with. It's so much easier to think about the first draft just as the gathering of ingredients. And, you know, if I could get everyone to get through the gathering of those ingredients in just like, I don't know, anywhere from like maybe like 3 months rather than in like a year, your life's going to be a lot easier. If you can just stop trying to make it good and just tell the truth, get it all out there, get all the ingredients on the page, and know that you will always rewrite and you will always need to write. But it's really hard to know what's working in a script or not if you don't have a full beginning, middle, and end story going. So if you've ever been caught rewriting in the first draft because you're like, I need to get it right. Anyone ever rewrite the first draft, the first 10 pages of your script like a dozen times? Right? It's impossible. Neurologically, what's happening in your brain is that you're like, I need to get it right. But your brain is like, we have no idea what this story really is. So we can't tell what's right or wrong. And so nothing's going to feel right. So you're just going to rewrite those pages over and over and over and over and over again. So my suggestion is also, don't start with your first 10 pages. The last 10 pages you should write of your first draft should be the first 10. Just start with your inciting incident and run forward. And just know that you will never know what the beginning of your script needs to look like until you get through the entire draft. Saves you a lot of time, works with your brain. All right, so once you have that summary, then you're gonna you're gonna look at those things and you're gonna be like, is my structure doing what it needs to do? Is the story doing what it needs to do? Is the theme, plot, character? And you're gonna find those places where like, you know what, actually the structure, you know, there's room for improvement on all of these things. So then you can go in and you're gonna do a new summary. After you explore and you realize, okay, there might be some time in between these two summaries where you have to do a lot of daydreaming and, you know, visualization and be like, okay, what might I do? But the next summary you do should be the summary that helps you and gives you a little bit of a roadmap for the next rewrite. So then you go in and you're like, okay, let me rewrite a summary, not based off of, yes, this first draft, but this is a summary about where I want to go in the second draft or in the next draft. And I do this between every single draft. I always do a summary of where have I been in this draft, and then, all right, where do I want to go in the next draft? So then you write I recommend a 1, but you can do maybe 2-page summary. Again, where you're like, you know, in the normal world, what's happening? Maybe a couple sentences about that, a couple sentences for your inciting incident, a couple sentences about how your inciting incident changes the normal world and it makes it impossible for that character to stay in that place. A couple of sentences about the end of Act 1, break into Act 2. Continue that all the way through until you get through, and then reread that, make any adjustments. And if you look at that and you're like, yes, it would be amazing if my next draft was this, only in a screenplay format. And now you have a really lovely roadmap. Now, the key about roadmaps, though, are they should be working, malleable roadmaps, which means that if you start writing and something really cool happens that's way more interesting than what you wrote on the page, you don't just blindly follow the summary. You go back in, you rework the summary, and you keep moving forward so that you're not cutting off your artistry and your ability to improv and find things on the page. But you always have that feeling of like, here's my little roadmap. This is going to make me feel a little bit safe as I'm wandering around. But really, you're still letting your artistry do the work of creating on the page in the moment. Yes, so in between drafts, summary work is really, really helpful. And remember, first start with, don't skip over the summary of what you currently have. That's an important one, because that also will help you when you start noticing, you're like, wow, if you do this for 5 scripts and you look at your first draft summary, you're going to start to notice patterns. And you're going to be like, oh, wow, I always have like a bulkiness here. And once you start to learn your body and your mind's natural patterns, you'll know how to work with them more effectively moving forward. Like I realized a pattern of like, I almost always in a first draft, and this is true for a lot of people, but I'm like, almost always my inciting incident is on page 40 of my first draft. It's a very common thing for most writers. And I'm like, because usually it takes your body like 30 pages of just like wandering around and getting to know the world and the characters and everything. I also realized that I can be very obscure with some of my my structural points. So I've learned how to push myself to a feeling where I'm like, ooh, this feels way too obvious for my audience. And that saves me a few drafts, because I know that because of my weird brain and my fear that I'm being too obvious, I hold back. And so I don't need to like fix myself or change myself. I just know that I need to go to a point in the script where I feel like I'm kicking a dead horse. And that usually for an audience leaves them at like, I actually get it, Jessica. Instead of for me, where I'm like, oh, like, you know, a butterfly landed on a flower. Clearly it means he's dead. And my audience is like, what the heck are you talking about, Hinds? So summary work, and then move forward. That way you have a very clear plan. One of the things I think is quite damaging is to just go into a rewrite blind without having an intention and a to-do list. Just going through and being like, let me fix things or make things better. Your conscious brain is not built to be able to focus on as many things that need to be addressed. So you are working against your brain chemistry, which means you may have to go in and do like 20 rewrites versus doing maybe like 6, because you're just not streamlining the process according to your brain. And when you go in and rewrite, you should be doing top-down work, meaning the first thing you want to look at is, you know, the character always comes first. Always start with character, you guys. Characters first, story second, then structure and plot is at the bottom. Plot is way easier to rewrite than story. Structure's born out of the character. So you can't really have great structure if your character isn't fully developed. That means you're using a structure that isn't born out of that character, which means you're probably mad-libbing it from another film, which may look okay, but it's not going to be art, and it's not going to get your piece to the place where it needs to be. Right, plot versus story. Great. I like to define craft tools in ways where it unconsciously, neurologically makes it easier for you to write well. So if we define food as anything your body can digest, you're probably going to end up eating a lot of crap that is not good for your body. But if we define food as organic, gluten-free, nutrients dense, and tasty, it limits what is food, but it almost guarantees that everything you eat is going to be awesome. So the way that I define plot and story, right? Again, this is going to be different than what other people say. That's fine. Let people use whatever they want. But if you choose to define plot and story this way, it will help you unconsciously be able to write more effectively. So story is the heart of your film. The story is what is important. The story is the way that your character is changing as they're going on this journey, or the way that these characters' relationships are changing as they're going on this journey. The story is universal. The plot is the specific way in which you are delivering that visually to your audience. So a plot would be the car you drive, but the story is a road trip with your family, bringing your family closer together because maybe something's been pulling you guys apart, right? So the specificity of driving a van from San Francisco to Los Angeles, that might be the plot. But the story is bringing the family closer together. So your plot's going to be really specific. It's going to be external. It's going to be visual. It's going to be unique. It is going to be something we've never seen before. Your story is going to be universal. It's going to be connected. It's going to be the things that we need to hear over and over again in every generation, just in a new way. Because that's why we tell stories to begin with is, before we had therapy and psychology, we had storytelling. So the story is the most important thing. The way you execute it is also very important, but the reason why I always say take care of your story first is that, if someone asks, if there's an issue with the plot, I can rewrite that very quickly, and it usually doesn't affect anything it has less of an effect on the things on either side of it. But if you change a story aspect, that's like messing with the foundation of the building. You may have to do a lot of rewriting from shifting the story around, right? If we look at the story of, if you're just like if one of my producers is just like, I don't like this thing about her being a dentist. Like, she doesn't have to be, the dentist is a plot thing. I'm like, great, I can rewrite it so she's no longer a dentist. I can turn her into a pediatrician. I can turn her into a baker. That's fine. That's a plot issue. That's a plot thing, easy to fix. The story aspect, though, if they suddenly were like, oh, we don't want this to be about a woman and self-doubt. I'm like, oh my God, this entire thing is about her in relationship to her self-doubt. Like, if I have to go in there and rewrite that, that's a page 1 rewrite. Oof, that's a lot. So separating your understanding of this is story, this is plot, and also when you're problem solving in your script, looking at, is this a story issue or is this a plot issue? Because you'll want to address those in different ways. Okay, so now it's the difference between story and theme. Great. Your theme, the most effective way to think of theme is, for a lot of people, they think of theme as one word, and I consider that a thematic topic. Like family, it's not really a theme, it's a topic. An effective theme would be something like, denying one's family leads to isolation and tragedy. That's a strong theme. So the theme essentially is the truth about the world that the story is supporting. It's saying, like, if you watch this, this is the truth about this world that this author wants you to understand. Or refusing to let go or allowing yourself to let go leads to connection and health, right? So the theme is like this one sentence sum of the truth about the world or about humanity that the author is communicating, and it's brought to life through the story, right, of which is born of this character, right, and the plot's just the way that you're delivering it. And so it's sort of like a hexagon, and each of these things are connected on a different side, so they're just different aspects of what we call a film, right? And the more that you practice them, you can sort of be like, oh yeah, like, but it's true. It's like theme is story is character, and plot's the way that you're choosing to deliver it in that moment. Can you please talk more about structure? Need a magic bullet formula. Fabulous. Yeah, let's talk about structure. I would like to talk about structure for rewriting in a way that doesn't, there's really no like magic thing that I can tell you where something's going to be easy. And like, it's never going to be easy, you guys. If writing a great script was easy, everyone would do it, and then no one would give you lots of money to be able to do it because anyone could do it. So don't try to make things easy. Don't waste any time or energy. It's like, I wish climbing Mount Everest were easy. It's like, no, just learn how to enjoy climbing mountains, and you don't need it to be easy. You can just be like, oof, I love climbing mountains. But for structure, I think the way that most people think about structure doesn't help them write awesome films, because most of the time people are thinking of a producer structure. And I like to break things up psychologically, which is there's a character structure, there's a writer structure, there's a reader structure, there's an audience structure, and there's producer structure. So your structure in the first draft, you want to be taking care of the you structure and the character structure. You shouldn't even think about an audience, right? We've all seen what happens when you watch a movie and you're like, that's there for the audience, but that character would never say that. It feels really, really wrong, and you get pulled out of the film. If you take care of the you structure first, because this is art, be an artist, not just a designer. You take care of the you structure and the character structure, the audience, reader, and producer structure are actually much easier to take care of. Like, that's actually not that bad. The hardest thing is having that vulnerability of, I'm going to put myself on the page, and that a patience to step into your character and fully understand them and surrender to them and realize that they don't know they're in a film. So they are not going to do anything for your audience. But let's say you get, right, you've already taken that. You're like, Jessica, I'm on the page. My character's on the page. Like, now I really do need to like start thinking of like the overall structure of the piece and the characters. It all starts with your scene structure. Okay. And so one of the things I want to get to with you guys is just, if you look at a scene, because the way I look at scene structure, it's not coming from an academic, like, let's study a bunch of scenes and say what they all have in common. Because I get really tired of people who do that. Like people who write books where they're like, I studied the 100 most successful films and this is what they all have in common, so this is what you should be writing, is BS. Correlation is not causation. I could watch those same films and be like, you know, in each of them, someone is talking near a tree. So clearly you need to have a moment where your character is talking near a tree. And it's just insane. What's more effective is to understand what's going on like in your audience. So most sequences, so for producer structure, for the industry standard, you know, let's pretend like we're not doing obscure movies right now. Let's just think about like, you know, middle of the road, like you're submitting to Hollywood type of a thing. You're doing a traditional narrative. The producer structure stuff of just 3-act structure, beginning, middle, and end. That's easy. Beginning, middle, and end. I mean, it's easy to understand, not easy to execute. You need a beginning, middle, and end. Okay, great. Right? But then you get into your audience structure. Now, in audience structure, within those 3 acts, you have sequences. A sequence is just a smaller unit of measurement for a little thing that happens. So you have 3 big things that happen. Within those 3 big things, there are like 3 to 12 littler things. And within those sequences, there are then scenes. So you have moments that make up scenes, scenes that make up sequences, sequences that make up acts, and acts that make up an entire film. So if we go all the way down to the scene structure, what you'll notice is that great scene structure is very similar to great sequence structure, which is very similar to, it's like a little Russian doll. The reason why is because each one of those things has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Now you'll find things like some people might say, oh, like your sequences should be, you know, like no more than 10 pages long. And that feels really arbitrary. But let me tell you why, on average, a sequence is approximately, you want to look at like 7 to 13, you know, pages for sort of this one unit. In the brain of a reader or an audience member, about every 32 seconds, our brain is updating our internal narration. So that means about twice a page, or once or twice a page, your reader, a little thing in the brain is going to update the story they're telling themselves about what's going on. And then about every 7 minutes, this evolved, like animals have this too. Like, does anyone have an animal like a cat, and your cat's just like licking some water, and then randomly, or they're asleep and randomly for no reason, they just look up and look around? So built into the mammal brain, which we have a human brain just on top of our mammal brain, which is on top of our reptile brain. the nervous system, to protect itself, about every 7 minutes is just like, look around and make sure nothing's trying to eat you. And so when your audience is watching a film, about every 7 minutes or so, they're going to be a little bit pulled out and just be aware of what's going on. So if you make sure that about every 7 to 10 minutes, something big structurally that shifts the story and in one direction or another happens, your reader and your audience are not going to suddenly pick up their cell phone or be like, ugh, what time is it? Right? So in your first draft, don't even try to do this, because in your first draft, there's no way you're going to know how to, if you overwrite in your first draft, that is necessary. Right? But, you know, and this isn't about short attention span. That's like this weird thing that, you know, this is like been built in like since the dawn of time for humans, you know, like it's just that it's not that we can't pay attention. It's that your nervous system wants to make sure that you're not in trouble. And so that's different than like the average attention span of, you know, an audience or the younger generation. But so when I think about structure, I'm not thinking about what other people say I should do or what the industry is even like, what's popular or trendy at the moment. I'm looking at, I want to take my audience on a journey. And I want to have my audience have this profound experience with this character and their story. And I'm going to be making my decisions off of what actually gives them that experience. But it all kind of comes back to, do you understand the structure of a scene? I find most writers do not. One big question I like to ask when people are reading through their script is, I'm like, here's a good question to ask yourself. Be like, is this actually a scene? Or a better question is, how do you define a scene? The way you define something will determine the way that your body unconsciously interacts with it, right? So if you don't have a working, functioning definition of what a scene is, chances are you're going to be writing not scenes. So I'd be interested now, everyone, what is your working definition of a scene? How do you define a scene? How do you know when something's a scene or not when you read it? Okay. I did something for you guys, just for you guys, okay? And if you don't know, I'm heavily dyslexic. And I created this today, so I didn't have time to send it to any of my editors. So please, if there are spelling errors in this, please don't crucify me. Please don't yell at me. You know, first draft. But what I really wanted to do is I really wanted something that was concrete for you guys, that you could be like, what can I do every time that I can look at, which won't control the rewrite. You know, I'm not going to tell you guys how to rewrite your scripts, because that depends on who you are, what you're doing, what's important to you, what the story is. But I was like, how do I create something that could be used on every scene, on every script, that wouldn't just lead you into a Mad Lib thing or like creating something that's, you know, just a ripoff of Star Wars. And I realized that the thing that people need, instead of thinking about what do I do, is you guys really just need to be asking more questions about your work. So I created a document. It's Meditative Writing's 20 questions, because I thought that was a good number. And so if you guys want to, if you go to meditativewriting.org/20Q, as in 20 questions, you will see the document that I have created for you. And I even made it, you can download it at the bottom, so you can print it out so that you can have it with you when you write. And these are just 20 questions where if you're looking at a scene and you start and you ask, you're not even going to get through the list, because one of these things is going to hit, you're going to go, oh, that. Now, you shouldn't go and do every single question on every scene. There's no need for that. But I want to kind of walk through, because I think not only going through these questions and explaining some of them so you understand, but I think then at the end, you guys are probably going to be able to tell me what an effective definition of a scene actually is. And like I said, if you can get the scene down, then you can get sequence, and then you can get act, and then you can get the entire thing. Number one. All right, so again, let's say you write a scene and you read. Now, first of all, I should say, you guys, if you write a scene and it's working and it's beautiful, do not do this. Do not mess with your beauty. If you write it, even if it doesn't make, even if you're like, it doesn't do all the things it's supposed to, great art, if it works, even if it's technically not supposed to. And your artistry can do things that like technically you shouldn't be able to get away with, but you can because it works so well. So if you write a scene and it's working well, do not mess with it. Do not look at these questions. Just be like, thank the gods, you know, and move on to the next piece. But if you read a scene and you know, you're like, this scene needs to be rewritten, then you go to these questions. And only then, trust your artistry. Always trust your artistry first. It is more valuable than your craft because your artistry is the thing that no one else can do that you can do. That's what makes you valuable in this industry, is that you have something that no one else has. And that's how you are weird and strange and messed up in a way that is completely unique to you. So never get rid of that from your piece. Ever. Ever. I don't care if people tell, like people, like that's what I mean also about readers who like, you know, especially when you have like a reader who doesn't know you and doesn't know what you're trying to do. You know, there's so many times where I'm like, I read something and I'm like, this doesn't work. Why are they doing it? And then I talk to the writer and I'm like, oh, what they're going for is beautiful. I just interpreted it the wrong way. And I'm like, okay, do this, this, and this. And now a reader will really, really get it. And so you don't have to like stamp out your artistry and your weirdness. We need that. You know, we need you to be Beyonce. We need you to stand out, right? Okay, so number one, who is the main character of this scene and what do they want from the secondary character? I feel like that literally is 50% of the issues with a scene. Is you're like, oh, my characters don't want anything from each other. Now you might be doing a moment. Moments are different than scenes. You can have, like, if you're like showing a campus, the quad, the classrooms, you know, if you're doing a montage or a series of shots, those are little moments. Those are moments, fine, fine, fine. A screenplay is made up of mostly scenes and a few moments. That's fine. But for your scenes, there's two characters and they want something from each other, right? Number two, what would the secondary character need to do or say that would allow the main character to know they've achieved what they want? Because this is just true to human nature, you guys. This is not a screenwriting thing. This is like a life thing. Like, you get in a fight with who here has ever had a fight about taking out the trash or doing the dishes? Anyone? Anyone? I feel like I've broken up with someone because of the dishes. Daily. Valid. I fight with myself. I live alone, you guys. I literally got mad at yesterday Jessica for not doing the dishes before she went to bed. I had a fight with myself. Okay. So everything, we want an outcome. There's a very specific visual image you have in your head of what you want that person to do. And that's actually what you're going after. You may not consciously be aware of it, but it's true in the human brain. You have this image and you're like, Jessica doing the dishes. Yeah. Right. And so it helps a lot to build a screenplay, again, getting into the psychology of the character to understand what, you know, if I want Jess to do the dishes, like, what does that look like? And then I can drive towards that. So that if I get physical, it's like I grab her hand and I'm like, shove the dish in it and like take the soap and I'm like, you're going to wash this dish, you know? And maybe your character doesn't go that far, but you know that they could. So that's the first one. It's like, does your character have a want? Is it ingrained in the other character? And are they actually pursuing it? That literally takes care of like 80% of the issues and scenes that I look at. Just so often. It's like, I write the words character, want, and pursuit next to like most of the scenes that aren't working. I'm like, they're just not pursuing it. Maybe they have a want, but they're not going after it. Right? Number three, if this character succeeds, what emotional need do they think it will fulfill? This is important for story. This is the difference between story and plot. The tangible want is doing the plot. The emotional need is all about the story, right? Because the only reason I want you to do the dishes is because I feel like then you will, like, that will be proof that you respect me. And this is where good drama comes from, because you can totally do the dishes in a way that doesn't give me respect, and that's good drama. That's what we want to see. So yeah, what does this character think that's going to give them emotionally? Number four, What has just happened to the character right before this scene? What is their mood, emotional energy? I cannot tell you how many times you come into a scene and your character's just blank. And I'm like, that's not true to human beings. Like right before this class, a bunch of stuff happened to me, right? My hair did not want to cooperate. I was going to have my hair down, and I spent about 5 minutes, which is more than I normally do on my hair, going, the hair is going back in a bun, because I looked like a Tasmanian devil who was electrified. That's going to affect the way your character enters a scene, and whether they're in a good mood or a bad mood, right? If your character's feeling confident, great. Oh, who here hasn't showered in a while? You ever notice how if you haven't showered in a while and like you're going to meet someone, even though they can't really smell you or anything, you're like, it affects how you act, right? Like, who here's not wearing pants? I'm wearing jeans. That's going to affect the way that I am, right? So spending a little bit of time to understand what's happening to your characters in between your scenes is going to help you write awesome scenes. And a lot of times what's going on in the scene that's not working is that you're treating your character like a puppet. And I'm like, your character's not a puppet. They live in between these scenes. They're tired, or they're exhausted, or they're giddy, or, you know, if you need your character to come in peppy, then whatever, have them. Just imagine that they found $5 on the street right before they enter the scene, and they're uncharacteristically in a good mood. But understanding what's happening right before the scene, very valuable. All right, what is the story your character is telling themselves about the situation that they are in? This is huge, you guys. The story you choose to tell yourself about what's going on determines how you feel about it, which determines what you do. So if you don't know what the story your character is telling themselves, and realize when you rewrite, you can be like, okay, what story is the character telling themselves now? You need to rewrite the scene. Just go in and be like, what if my character told them a way worse story? Right? So like, let's say you came in to log on and no one was in this room. Like the chat was empty, you know, and you told yourself, oh, I must have gotten the wrong day, right? That's going to change the way you feel about what's going on compared to if you tell yourself the story, oh, ISA messed up and sent me the wrong link. Or you could tell yourself the story that, you know, you finally have lost your mind, 2020 has won, and you are completely insane now. The facts are the same, the stories are different. The story your character tells themselves about the situation they're in changes the way they feel, which changes the way they act, which can create a great rewrite. All right, what internal, wait, nope, that's not true. Number 6. Is this the most effective story and want this character could be telling themselves and going after for creating an awesome film, right? Just give yourself options. Be like, is there something that would be more effective? Don't ask if it's right or wrong. Asking if something is right or wrong in art will never help you neurologically. There is no right or wrong. There's just what works and what doesn't, or what's effective for the journey you want to give your audience and what doesn't, but there's no right or wrong. And that languaging actually triggers a system in the brain that cuts off your creativity. So don't use that language anymore. All right, what internal conflict might be happening within your character? What wound from their past might be aching and playing itself out? Love that one. That one will give you big structure. The wounds from your character's past are always the answer to the structural resolution of the overall film, which is why you want to do research and discover the wounds of your character's past. All right, 8. Are both characters' tactics changing throughout the scene? And are the tactics getting bigger with each change? Sometimes I see a scene where it's just like the character's trying the same tactic over and over and over again. And I'm like, whew, that's when your audience gets ahead of you. So check the tactics for how they're going after getting their want. If this character fails miserably, what would the consequences be? Are those consequences tragic enough? This is where you want to be an over-dramatic theater nerd, okay? Every scene, your character might fail. And you want to visualize, if they fail, what are the consequences? And are they horrifically awesome and wonderful in the torturous way that you have to torture your characters? Sometimes people not staying interested in a film is just the fact that, you know, the consequences of their actions aren't, you know, you're like, okay, yeah. But that's fun, just to visualize, like, how could the consequences be far worse? Number 10, is this the most awesome location for this scene? This is a really easy one that a lot of people just skip over that I don't understand. Where I'm like, sometimes a great scene just just sometimes you get stuck in boring locations. And I'm like, sometimes just taking a scene that maybe it's something we've seen before and putting it in a location that's just like a little bit like, whoa, you know, could be awesome. Like, have fun. Rewrite the scene in the top of a Ferris wheel, you know, rewrite the scene in a graveyard, you know, get out of the office if you can, unless you're doing a film specifically because you want to shoot it because you have an office. All right. Number 11, is the second character in the scene pursuing their want from the main character? Are they active? Is the want specific? What emotional need is driving them? So yeah, we only talked about half the scene. A lot of people, they take care of their protagonist, but then the secondary character is just sort of like there. Right? It's hard having such drastic, oh yeah, not in every single scene. Yes, no, Robert, absolutely. Like, if every single scene, like, no, that's when you get melodrama, which you might be going for. If you're doing a soap opera, yes, maybe in every single scene, it should be life and death. But that's what I'm saying. It's a question. You can ask it. And if the answer is like, no, this scene doesn't need that, then the answer is no, and great. Like I said, these are not all things that you need to check off for every scene. This is simply a list of questions to ask yourself when you feel like you don't know what to do rewriting a scene. And just know that at least one of these is going to make you go, oh, now I know what I need to work on in this scene. What do you think about experimenting with scenes, putting them in a location you don't plan on using? Like, oh, I think that's fabulous. Putting your characters in situations and having them play things out, even when you know it's not going to be right for the film, is great, because you find when you exaggerate and you use metaphor, you can find things that you need in order to rewrite the rest of the script. This comes from experience directing theater. One of the best tools you can do is when your actors are getting a little bit tight and you're not finding what you need in the piece, is that you switch it up and you're like, let's do it as if you're on the moon, or let's do it as a musical. And then you find something in that, because you have to remember that when you're rewriting, you're not trying to write the final draft. You're trying to just rehearsing, rewriting. It's about digging things up and finding new things. And then one day you just suddenly are like, oh shit, like, it's done. But if you aim for the final draft instead of just aim for discovering what you need next, that can get in your way neurologically. So playing around with, and also giving yourself options, like, you know, don't just think what's the right midway point. Be like, let me come up with 10 different options and let me write those options and see which one feels more right. Because what works up here doesn't work on the page necessarily. It's like when you go to a store and you look at the mannequins, you have to try those pants on, because those pants are gonna look different on you than they do on those mannequins. And in your head, it's all mannequins. So you really gotta try these scenes out and write them on the page, and just know that every scene you write, you're gonna write a lot of scenes where you go, nope, that wasn't the way you were gonna go. And you wanna just get used to that. You know, just like if you were a baker and you wanted to create a great cookie recipe, you're gonna surrender the fact that you're probably gonna make like hundreds of versions of these cookies that don't work. And you wanna just be okay with those numbers. Otherwise, this is gonna be really, really a lot of pain and suffering for you. Number 12, what is the story, want, emotional need of the secondary character? How are these growing out of the psychology and the circumstances of their character? Got to know your characters, get to know them. That's what the first draft is for. Go back, write scenes from their childhood. Write scenes you know will never make it into the script, but help you to understand and get to know your characters on a visceral body level so that you're not just puppeteering them. How will an audience watching know visually when this character has gotten what they want from the other character? Is this visual, right? A lot of times people are like, oh, the character, they have the want, but the want isn't something external enough in the plot. So if you're not separating your plot and your story elements enough, that can be problematic for structure, definitely. It's kind of like football. If we couldn't see the ball and we couldn't see the end zone, it would be very boring to watch football, right? If we couldn't see the soccer ball and we couldn't see the net and the goal, soccer would be boring to watch, right? And so that's what keeps an audience being able to track and feel it. Yeah, like hockey. Sometimes with hockey, it's the puck's so small, I'm like, I don't, and then they fight, and I'm like, yeah, But no, I did a whole deep dive into sports because I'm not really a sports person, but I study a lot of sports psychology because it works with writers. The audience needs something to track. There's a reason there's numbers on a football field. You know, and using that metaphor, don't tackle your characters on the 50-yard line. Tackle your characters on the 1-yard line, and that will get your audience more engaged and like, so close. All right. Number 14, are all your characters pursuing their wants in a way that are unique to their personality, their psychology, their egos, their fears, and their hopes? If you've ever gotten the note of like, this is cliche or this is boring, this is true again about human nature. The way that I pursue something is going to be unique based off of my personality, my psychology, where my egos are, what my fears are, what my hopes are, what my fantasies are. So thank you if I skipped 13. If you don't know yet, again, this is what the first draft is for. The first draft is where you discover your character's personality, you discover your character's psychology, you discover their egos, you discover their fears, you discover their fantasies. That's all comes out in the first draft. And it's something you discover, you don't choose it and assign it. Your characters are real, don't treat them like puppets. 13. Oh no, I got 13. Great. 15. Where in the scene are there opportunities to do more visual storytelling or more effective, awesome visual storytelling? That's a good question to always ask. The answer might be like, nope, this one's good. Great. But sometimes if you notice, you're like, this is very talky. Might be some opportunity to do, you know, I always do a read through my script where I just read the action. And if the story is hard to follow, I know I haven't done my job yet. Someone should be able to watch your film with the sound off and still understand the story. Is the situation or event of this scene as effective as possible? Now let's talk about the difference between an event or a situation and a scene. An event is a wedding. A wedding is not a scene. I don't want to watch your wedding video. I mean that in the nicest way possible, you guys. Like, has you ever done that? You're just like, when you're like, this is just a wedding. Like, I'm just watching a wedding. Now, if I was watching a wedding and the best man was trying to apologize to the maid of honor during the ceremony, now I want to watch. So the events are great to use because an audience like everyone knows what happens at a wedding. It is a great thing to be like, cool. It's like a MacGuffin. You're like, okay, it's a big wedding. Now the audience will be like, oh, we'll know when it's over. Great. It allows you to do some storytelling. But the scene is character with a want from another character and is pursuing it. Right? So one person wanting to marry their partner and the other person wanting to marry that partner, that's not a scene. They want the same, that's an event. But someone wanting, if the best man wants to apologize to the maid of honor, and the maid of honor wants the best man to shut the hell up, and you know, right, now we have conflict, now we have a scene within the event. So many times I read something, I'm like, this is just like dinner. Dinner has a beginning, middle, and end. It is an event. And then you just have characters chit-chatting during dinner. And I'm like, what? I don't want to sit in on your dinner. I don't want to let no one wants to. It's, you know, it's only an event when a character with outside of the norms of that event, one character is pursuing a want from the other character, that other character in response is pursuing a want back against them. And that's really what we're watching. That is actual drama. Great. Number 17, what choices does the character make at the end of the scene that has consequences? Is there a stronger choice you could make? And this is a great tool. You guys, ranking your character's choices on 1 to 10, 1 being the most polite and non-exciting thing they could do, and 10 being the most dramatic, you know, screenplays aren't polite, big choice. And the key here is you're not allowed to use 7. If you allow yourself to use 7, you will forever end up in 7 land, which is, it's good, but not great, but I don't know what to do with it. But if you eliminate 7, so you then have to choose between it's an 8 or a 6, it makes it much clearer. If you're an 8 or above, you're doing good. If you're in 6 and below, you probably need to choose something bigger for your big moments. The bigger your choice, the bigger the choice is, the clearer it is to an audience and the quicker your story will move. So if you've gotten the note the story doesn't move quick enough, just go back and look at the choices your character makes at the end of each scene, rank them, put them all at a 2 and be like, what would be an 8? What would be an 8? And suddenly your story is going to start happening quicker. This goes back to human psychology, right? So if you want your life to change, make big choices. If you want things to stay the same, make small choices, right? Decide to sell your house and move to India. That's going to be exciting. Stuff's going to happen. You're going to go through stuff if you do that. But if you just stick with like, maybe I'll take a yoga class today, probably nothing's going to change. So the deeper you get into your script, the closer to 8, 9, and 10s of choice rankings of making big decisions, that's going to be good. Yeah, don't get stuck in 7 land. And this is actually just useful for your own life. If you're deciding what, on anything, you're like, just never use 7. It's one of the most helpful tools I've stumbled upon. All right, 18. What are the consequences of this choice and how do those consequences create the situation of the next scene? This is where we get sequence structure coming from. Who hasn't gone blonde in the pandemic? I actually had rainbow hair before 2020, so I actually went au natural. What are the consequences of this choice? So in great screenplay sequence structure, not for every single one, but most of the time, your character's gonna make a choice at the end of the scene. That's gonna create a consequence. That consequence becomes the situation in the next scene that your character gets into, or the event of that next scene. And if you start doing that, you're going to start to see how your scenes link together to create an entire sequence. And they're like these little dominoes that go off, or right, like steps leading up in a pyramid, rather than what I see in a lot of emerging writers' work, which is a series of scenes that have the same character, but none of them are actually causing each other or building up to anything. And I'm just like, they all have your character in it, but this scene could be over here. And, so we want that domino effect, and looking at that and being like, what is the consequence of this choice? And allowing that to be the situation for the next scene is a fabulous and very stress-free way of making sure you have that, start having that bigger structure happening. Number 19, what relationship is, this is an important one. What relationship is starting, ending, or changing during the scene? This one, I swear to God, I don't know why people ignore this. This goes to audience structure. The audience understands structure. The audience doesn't care about screenplay structure, okay? They don't care. Your audience does not care about inciting incidences. Your audience does not care about the hero's journey. Your audience doesn't know. They don't care. So the way your audience experiences good structure is the way we experience good structure in our lives. So how do you know your life is going well or your life is going poorly? Think about it right now. If I were to ask you, how has the past few months been? Now you're instantly going to know it's either good or bad or this or that. But then think about why you know that. What's going on? You're like, so like for me, I'd be like, the past 2 months have been great. Want to know why? Because I started working out, I started eating healthy, and I cut out a friend in my life who was being really, really damaging. Beginning of relationship, end of a relationship. We understand the movement of our lives through the beginning, the end, or the major change in our relationships to other people, our relationships to ourselves, and our relationships to our work, our relationship to our activity, our relationship to our inner child, right? You never really have to think about screenplay structure if you just think about relationships. I would say that'll get you about 85% of the way there. So if you're someone who you find structure like, it feels like math, or it's like feels technical, it doesn't have to be. Just nestle into your character and just ask yourself, like every time you hang out with a friend, that friendship is either getting closer together or it's being pushed further apart. That is true. right? There's never anything that's stagnant. And so if you look at your scenes and you're like, oh, like what's going to be story for my audience, which is then going to lead to the structure is this relationship starting, ending, or if it's changing, how is it changing? Is it bringing closer together, or is it being pulled further apart by this scene? And that's one of my favorite things to go through and do, because it helps me feel so connected to, like, emotionally to the characters and treating them like they're real humans, rather than sort of coming in with like this to-do list that's like, you know, the industry says you have to do this, this, and this. And, you know, I don't know. I've always been, I'm a wannabe rebel. So anything that makes me feel like I can ignore what I'm supposed to be doing, but still gets the job done is pretty good. Number 20. Oh my God, we already at 20, you guys? I'm talking very fast. Okay, I promise I'm gonna open up to questions after this so that you guys, you know. What is the story the reader and or audience is telling themselves about the scene? Always end on this one. Do all the other stuff first. The story your character tells themselves will determine what's going on for them. The story you tell yourself as a writer will make it either easier for you to write or harder. But eventually you need to get to understanding. You should be, by a final draft, I should be able to point to every single moment in your script, and you should tell me, this is what the audience should be telling, I want the audience to be telling themselves about this moment. Because then I can tell you whether or not you're succeeding at that. And that really helps when we're looking at your script. But really thinking about, there's so many writers who don't think about, like, someone has to actually sit down and read this. And they're gonna be tired and they're gonna be frustrated. And you wanna make it easy for that reader to go on the journey you want them to go on. So at the very end of these questions, ending on just like, what's the story an audience member, a complete stranger who doesn't know this story, who doesn't know me, if they're watching or reading this, what's the storytelling they're doing? Because in reality, a screenplay, a film doesn't happen on the screen. It really happens in the mind of the reader or the mind of the audience. And so if you're not considering their psychology and storytelling, that might be a place where, if you feel like you're putting out good content, but you're not getting the response you want, that might be the sort of next level to play around with that you haven't been considering, that you think you're giving experience A, but really people are experiencing G. And, you know, that's not good or bad. It's not that the script's bad. It's just that, you know, it's not, the audience isn't having the experience you want them to have yet. And then that would be the next stage of your rewriting.
Someone's asking if they could see an example of what a working summary or a roadmap looks like.
I would say this, you know, it's good messy when it's true and it feels connected, but it just doesn't look like what a screenplay normally would look like, right? So this might be giving yourself permission to not write specifically in screenplay format. You know, this might be doing more of like a novelistic approach where you go into the character's mind and you play around with those things. So you look at it and like someone will be like, that doesn't look like a screenplay, but artistically the story is good. Because a good story, good story is good story, whether you choose to turn it into a novel or you choose to turn it into a screenplay, like that's just the externalization of it. But finding the story and the characters first. And so a lot of writers I know, even my professional writers too, like they'll start in Word, and because it gives them, you know, some of my writers today just turned in pages where she has pictures. She literally is like put pictures in her first draft because it helps her to write and find the story and the characters. The first draft should be all about you getting your stuff out on the page, you know, you discovering why you need to write this script, and then finding the truth of your characters. Only after that, then you should think about an audience and a reader and all that other stuff. But it'll look different for everyone, but I would say probably messier than you want it, than your instincts are. We've been trained so much in Western education to like present something that is like, you know, has perfect spelling and you know, and that's great for when you're doing emails, but when you're creating a piece of art, you know, if you're serving the grammar god before you're serving the story god, you're not going to write something that's, I mean, I know, I'm pretty sure most of us are here because we want to sell a script, because we want to see our stories get made. And screen films are expensive for the most part. And it's a very busy industry and there's a lot of competition. So if you want your piece to be everything you want it to be, and at the level where you're like, this might get some attention and I have a shot of getting this made or out there, you really want to make sure that you are offering up the thing where no one can compete with you, which is your weirdness, you know, your artistry, that thing that for the most part education has beaten out of you, or at least dimmed your light. It's still there, but you just need to foster that, and you need to take care of that first and replace judgment with curiosity, because you're probably beating yourself up about it to the point where you're hiding your best work because you think, oh, well, I've never seen anything like that. And I'm like, yeah, that means it's good. If we've seen it before, it's not valuable, right? Even if you're doing a Cinderella story. Cinderella story has been done a million times. That's cool. We will need a new Cinderella story every 5 years. We'll need a new one. We need a COVID Cinderella story. I want to know, what's the COVID version? What's the Zoom version of the Cinderella story, right? Of the Romeo and Juliet. But you have to bring that place where you're like, I know that there's 100,000 people in this industry who have been working longer, that you know more, and that have better craft experience than me. But you are still going to say yes and take a chance on me because I can do this and no one else can do that. And that's going to come from, that's what your artistry, that's what your voice is. But in order to fit in school, you probably dumbed that down and buried it a little bit. And so I want to encourage all of you to honor that and to scream it at the top of your lungs, which is, you know, going back to what we started talking about at the beginning of class, which is, you know, think and be smart about who you let into the process of your writing. You know, you want people who understand that about art and about this industry. You don't want to just let people in where it's like that's why I hate sometimes the way people give feedback in group classes, where it's like, you can, like, who here has ever gotten a note in a class about their work where you just go, this has nothing to do with my work and this has everything to do with this person trying to prove how smart they are, or like this person like having issue with like the politics of my characters or the gender of my character. And like, I've seen that because I mean, I went to grad school for this, and I watched as I got notes upon notes about people who didn't want to watch violent scripts. And I'm like, I write violent scripts. I don't care if you like them or not. I need to know if my story is working. And I was in, you know, I might've been in a room full of people who just wanted to watch romantic comedies. And I'm like, I don't care what you want to watch. I want you to question your soul and your sanity while watching my thriller. So, you know, just, I don't want to scare you, and I don't want you to be like, I can't share my work with anyone, because that's certainly not true. But just, you know, this is your child. Like, think about like you wouldn't just hire anyone to babysit your child. You wouldn't just leave your child with a random group of people. Take a few moments, do a little bit of research, and just know that like some people may be great for some people and some people may not. Groups might work really well for you. Groups may not work really well for you. That's okay. There's no right or wrong. It's just what works well for you, right? What type of formats are being offered that work well for you? What is the curation of the feedback? Like, that's a big question. I'd say for any class you enter into, never enter into that class without asking first. If it's a workshop class where you share your work, you should write in and be like, how does the teacher curate the feedback? Or like, what is the theory behind it? Because if you do not ever want to be in a place where there's absolutely no curation of it, where they just are like, people will talk about your work and we're all free to say whatever. I have had people come to me where it's like they were in one class, someone said something about their script and it shut them down, and they didn't write for like 3 years because of that one freaking comment about, you know, from someone who just, they didn't think they were being mean. They just kind of were just like, you know. So just in that sense, protect yourself, protect your artistry. You know, there's a certain amount of growth that needs to happen with your artistic voice before you enter into like the arena of sending it out and hearing, you know, what producers and, you know, the competitions or whatever it is or, you know, sending it to your director and getting their notes from it. But just, yeah, like if you're like, Jessica, I'm good, my artistic voice is strong, great. But if you've been struggling with that, you know, you need to protect that. It's like you know, like you need to get to a place and grow your confidence in your voice and its realization that it is valuable and that it's actually the most valuable part of your writing. And that might take months or even years for some people, depending on the trauma that you may have had in various settings. And trauma doesn't have to be like someone burned your house down because your script was bad. Sometimes the smallest little moments with our script I you know, because I work with a lot of people who have huge writer's block. Like, actually, it's most of my TV writers, they come to me because they are at a place where they're like, I haven't written my own, I've been on the show for 5 years and I haven't written my work in my own personal stories in 4 years. And it's like, because there's so much trauma from things that have happened before that. Or, you know, if you were a kid and, you know, I remember once I wrote my first book in 3rd grade. It was called Mrs. Bradley's Butterfinger. And I included everyone in the class in that book. And I was so proud of myself because I was like, everyone's going to feel included. And Mrs. Bradley was my teacher and she loved Butterfingers. And so I knew she loved that. And we could make these books and we put them in the back of the library. And anyone could read the book. And then in the back page, you could write something to the author. And I know that they meant well by doing this. But what ended up happening is I went back a week later and I read the comments, and almost every single one of the comments was, you spelled this wrong, you spelled this wrong, you spelled this wrong, you spelled this wrong. And at grade 3, I had no idea that I was dyslexic. My parents had no idea. And I can tell you right now that that moment still hurts me when I think about it. Because I was like, I put all this time and energy into including everyone. And all anyone could do was say, you spelled stuff wrong. And I mean, I still have a hard time spelling my middle name without looking at it. And, you know, I get V's and Z's are the same exact thing to me. And it's great because it makes me more creative for creative writing. But when it comes to, you know, like grammar, spelling and grammar stuff, it's, you know, I have 3 editors that I have to send my stuff to because even Google's like, I have no idea what you're trying to spell, Jessica. Like, what is this word? So to me, that was a trauma. And, you know, stuff like that can stop people from writing or stop people from trusting their voice for years. And, you know, I never want that to happen to any of you guys. And if you have that, just know that, you know, you don't have to be chained to it, and you can let it go and it can no longer be effective and hurt you anymore.